Back when Kingdom Hearts 3 was released, one of my biggest criticisms with the game is that I never felt like you had a proper boss fight against most of the main villains of the game. I mean, I love 3, but I really hated how when you actually fought the real Organization 13, you fought them like 3 at a time or something, as opposed to each of them having their own individual well-designed boss battles like they did in 2. They apparently listened to that criticism though, because in the DLC episode of 3, they brought back the data battles, which was a thing in Kingdom Hearts 2, and in that game these were reduxes of existing bosses in the game with really ramped up difficulty, and a lot of people consider them some of the best bosses in the game. In 3, however, most of these fights are completely reimagined, and among some of the hardest fights in the entire series to boot, and your reward for doing them is a chance to fight the hardest boss in Kingdom Hearts history, Yozora. Getting footage for these has taken a while, to say the least, especially since I also did them on Critical Mode 2, which is the highest difficulty. However, while I was doing them, my sister gave me the idea to make a video ranking them all. And, you know, that sounds kind of fun. I really want to do more videos on this series anyway, so yeah, let's go ahead and try that. So here we go, ranking all of the data battles in Kingdom Hearts 3 plus Yozora from my personal least favorite to favorite. Number 14, Data Dark Riku.
Because I'm you. No, I'm me. I'm me, he says.
This fight sucks. There's just so much I hate about it. His normal combos are annoying, those little dark pin things are annoying, the red landmine things are annoying, his reflective spam shield is annoying, trying to differentiate what can and can't even be blocked is super annoying. I hate how he just never shuts up ever too. All these fights have a ton of battle quotes I hear a lot while trying to figure these battles out, and this is the only fight I ever found them to be annoying.
Think fast! Later! Come on! Think fast! Back at you! One more! Got it!
Like, that's just the keyword for this boss in general. It feels like his entire gimmick is mix-ups, which is truly as frustrating as it sounds. There's practically no rhyme or reason to which attacks he uses. It feels like the openings to attack him in return are completely random. Genuinely, I think his Desperation attack is actually easier to deal with than his default abilities, which just feels so wrong. Though Dark Aura does look really awesome in this game. So many of these bosses were a ton of fun to learn the attack patterns of, slowly learning new strategies and ways to either avoid or even counter damage entirely. Riku was the only exception to that. I just felt like I was button mashing the block button and counterattacking until he conveniently decided to let you get a full combo off on him. Eventually, I got the stinkiest, cheesiest win against him when I accidentally killed him when he wasn't even on screen while using Stitch, a common panic button I would go into for these fights. Frankly, I feel like I just got lucky here. I'll take a win though, because this fight was just a mess, and it seems like most people consider this one of the hardest ones anyway, so whatever, I'll take the easy win. You know, I think at this point it's probably a good time to mention that my personal bias of these various characters is probably going to have a bit of an impact on how I rank them, because on top of not liking this fight, I've always really hated how they handled this particular character ever since Chain of Memories. The concept behind him is really cool. He's a carbon copy of an existing character that grows jealous and vengeful that nothing about him is original. This ends in him fighting the real Riku, being defeated while wondering if it's even possible for someone like him to have memories or a personal expression that he can call his own. And what I thought they were going to do with him eventually was bring him back, have him overcome this struggle in developing his own identity in spite of starting out as a carbon copy of someone else. Like, that sounds kind of cool, honestly. But no, they just kind of pulled him into the more modern games via hand-wavy time travel logic, and I really hate it. Genuinely, I think the only reason why they brought him back in this way was just so they could have an excuse to have some form of Riku be a bad guy again. 'Cause, you know, nostalgia. And god, I know these old fights are iconic, and Riku is even most likely my favorite Kingdom Hearts character too, but the actual fights against him I've always felt were pretty hit and miss in the first place, and this one is definitely a miss. Number 13, Data Xigbar. You fight Xigbar quite a few times in this series, and genuinely, I think specifically his boss fight in 2, both the base fight and the data version, is one of the best designed fights in the entire series. And the reason why is because it manages to walk this extremely narrow tightrope between being a boss based around teleporting and projectiles, while at the same time not ever feeling like he's running away all the time, or that you're spending more time chasing him down than you are actually fighting him. The game does this in a lot of clever ways, between giving you multiple ways to actually close distance, giving him a long, really obvious animation for when he's open in the form of reloading, which is kind of clever, complete of an iconic quote as well, making the arena itself quite small so you can keep track of everything going on easier. Oh, and the new backdrop gimmick is really fun too, where he changes the field and puts you in these little gauntlets where the only goal is to get to him. Like, it's just a beautifully crafted boss fight that gets everything right. As for his Data 3 battle, let's just say he fell off that tightrope. You spend way more time chasing him down than you do hitting him. A lot of ways to approach him are gone, and when you do approach him, half the time he just teleports away a second later. His reloading openings are gone, and the cool gimmick where he changes the arena is now... Fucking look at this! You can't fight anyone here! It's huge! You can't even air step from one side of the arena to the other for some reason. They took one of the most defining fights in the entire series to me and basically just removed everything I liked about it. Heck, it even feels a little bit out of character for him to play much more cautiously here. I don't know, it just sucks. His Data 2 battle was plenty challenging while keeping all of his fun gimmicks and even character intact. If the ending of Remind is anything to go by, I think it's safe to assume that he'll probably be a recurring antagonist even after this game, and suffice to say, I just hope in future battles against him, they take more inspiration from his 2 counterpart than his 3 counterpart, you know? God, what an irritating boss fight. Number 12. Data Terra-Xehanort.
Some say Kai, but the meaning is the same.
So why not call it the Kai Blade then?
I don't think I've ever seen that name just spelled out like that outside of the journal, and it looks really weird. I can see why most people just call him Terra-Xehanort. This one was easy. The easiest Data by far, in my opinion. And while you'd think I'd take an easy win, especially after I've been on these fights for 3 months now, I think he may even be a little too easy, honestly. Like, it's the only one where I beat him and I was like, wait, that was it? The strategies for this fight are really cool when you're figuring them out. For example, I think it's kind of neat how most of his moves are easier to deal with while in the air. That's creative, and it works surprisingly in character against someone like Terra, who tends to fight best while grounded. There's also this cool strata friend taught me where after he shoots these dark Faraga looking things 3 times, you can air step through the 3rd stream of projectiles to attack him. I probably would have never figured that one out on my own. It's all super cool, though my biggest problem with this fight was while I found his attacks fun to learn, I felt like they were a little too easy to learn, and that he never really mixes them up in ways that make them more interesting to figure out again. It feels like every other attack you can get a full combo off on him if you retaliate it right, and after a while it starts to feel more like you're just doing the motions with him than actually engaging in an intense fight. His Desperation attack I kinda have a problem with too. Typically, you really gotta learn how to live through these, but for Terra-Xehanort over here, it honestly felt like it was the only one you could get through by just spamming dodge roll over and over again, which, now that I think about it, is kind of hilariously fitting for a boss that originally came from Birth by Sleep. But that's besides the point. Overall, though, I was surprised by how few tries this one took me in comparison to the others. I loved learning his attacks, but they became repetitive once I did. Meh, it's an alright boss fight. Number 11, Data Young Xehanort.
They try and play up the mystery to the identity of this kid, and I'm like, what are you fucking kidding me? That's Xehanort.
This fight isn't bad, I just think it's a little uninspired. Upon immediately starting this fight for the first time, the first thing I noticed that he had pretty low health for a Data battle, and that got this idea into my head that this is going to be one of those fights where win or lose, it's going to be over very quickly, and that is exactly what ended up happening. I would often either die in the first 30 seconds, or I would have a winning run that was like 2.5 minutes. And most of that time, frankly, is just blocking melee combos. He's got a couple cool spells, I guess. He can heal himself, though it's really not that big of a deal considering how low his health is. I'm not even sure if I even fully understand how this moves work, because he seems to counter me every time I stop it, but like, even that can be recovered from pretty easily. But yeah, that's kind of it. Really, this fight just wasn't too remarkable to me, which is weird because I was actually really concerned about this fight when I got to it, considering that in the game he was introduced in, he was actually my least favorite final boss of the entire series. Like, I just think he has a lot of bullshit mechanics in that fight, you know? For as much as I love Drink Drop Distance, I never really look forward to that fight. But this one, I don't know, it just wasn't that bad. Even his Desperation attack wasn't a big deal. You gotta learn when he fakes you out, but it seems like even his armor bar here has extremely low health compared to every other character in this area. And that's kind of all I have to say. I don't know, man, it's a fine fight. Also, before I move on a side note, my sister once referred to this character as Baby Xehanort, and ever since then I can't take him seriously anymore. Number 10, Data Luxord.
I synchro summoned 5 overpowered monsters in one turn.
So, when I bought Remind at launch, this was actually the only data battle I was able to do before putting the game down, because I guess I got distracted by something else, maybe something released at the time, I don't know. So, I actually knew quite a bit about this boss fight ahead of time. I mention this because I actually found this one to be one of the easiest. Maybe just a little harder than Terra-Xehanort, but there could just be a bit of bias there too. Anyway, this fight is kinda cool. Luxord is back to his old tricks again of throwing cards at you and forcing you to play minigames. His time bar mechanic is back, although to be honest, I personally think this fight is overall more fun in 2. The two main reasons are because his Desperation attack is a lot more brisk and fun to deal with. And, I'm gonna be honest, reaction commands just really make this fight work a lot better. Like, seriously, how wide Sora swings in this game compared to 2 will almost certainly lead to you hitting the wrong card on occasion, and losing time/health as a result. Also, he doesn't turn you into a card or a die in this fight either. That was such a weird and oddly memorable part of the fight in 2. I still like it though. Like, they didn't really screw it up the same way they did for Xigbar in my opinion. The core of the fight and what makes it work is still there, and it feels like he just uses a lot of different attacks, a lot of which are a ton of fun to do as well. I love how a lot of his moves play into each other as well. A lot of his attacks have him scattering cards all over the ground, and these cards flip up to make this move he does later in the fight where you have to find him way harder. It pushes you to play better, as if you get really good at blocking set attacks, most of his cards are going to be destroyed by the time he gets to this, like, Simon Says, like, can you find me move. So, you know, they can't come back to bite you later. That's kinda cool how, like, getting good at one game can make other games easier. It's a really cleverly designed fight. My biggest problem with it is, frankly, his Desperation attack lasts like a million years and I kinda hate it. However, unlike in 2, it doesn't feel like you borderline have to do this successfully in order to win. In fact, in the footage I actually upload to YouTube, I actually lost that minigame, but I still won the fight, which, I'm gonna be honest, I respect. That does make this battle a lot more bearable to me. Also, he might have my favorite boss theme of any data battle as well. I haven't even talked about the music in this area yet, but the battle themes for all of these fights are actually remixes of battle themes you've heard in this series before. I think the reason why I like this one so much is because I've always been a fan of battle music that's more slow and analytical instead of super fast-paced and high energy, because it kind of gets you into the mood to slow down and think your way through a battle instead of trying to brute force your way through it. And that's appropriately really in character for Luxord as well. But yeah, this fight's neat. I think his 2 fight is still better personally, but I'm still pretty happy with what we got here. Number 9, Data Master Xehanort.
It's all over, Xehanort!
Okay, this fight was pretty cool. Basically, they took the single proper fight against one of these characters in the base game, that being the final phase of the final boss of Kingdom Hearts 3, and ramped up its difficulty significantly. That might sound a little lazy considering all these other fights are pretty original from the get-go, as well as the fact that this will probably be the last one you do before Yozora, but I actually think it kind of works here considering that's more or less how all the data battles from 2 were designed. Unfortunately, this does also mean though that I don't have much to say about it. Like, just imagine the final boss, but way harder. That's Master Xehanort for you. There are a couple really cool attacks I especially like, though. Remember those giant lasers he would sparingly use in his original boss? Well, they're not only a core part of his strategy now, but there's even multiple kinds. I really like this pattern in particular, where he appears in the middle of them temporarily, and if you hit him, you can finish dodging the laser attack and then get a full combo back on him later. That's kinda cool. Uniquely, he also has attacks that are easier to deal with at certain distances, like this sword throw, for example, where if you're too far away when he does it, it'll explode into ice. Attacks like this add a new level of strategy you'll have to learn aside from just block or dodge roll everything. He also has a lot of openings you wouldn't really expect to be openings, making the fight feel a lot more dynamic as a result. It gets you into the mood to experiment more of what can actually work against him. It's a pretty fun send-off to the Data fights. God, speaking of this being the last Data battle too, can I mention real quick how surreal it felt to see cutscenes right after beating him? Remember, I've been pecking away at these fights for several months, so by the time I actually beat him, I frankly forgot there was even a plot going on at all. It is pretty hilarious when you look at it all in context like that, because seriously, if there's one series that would hide important lore behind 13 super bosses, it's the Kingdom Hearts series. God damn, this series is really something. Number 8, Data Ansem.
What the wait, what? What the fuck is this?
This one was actually the first one I did because that friend I mentioned earlier told me that it was one of his favorites, and okay, in hindsight, maybe I shouldn't have done this one first because I frankly found them to be one of the hardest ones, but it kind of got me into the right mindset of what to expect from these fights in terms of difficulty, so maybe it was a good choice after all. In spite of how embarrassingly long this one took me, I actually ended up really liking it. Ansem has always been a very charming character to me because he's just kind of the epitome of just a default, yet incredibly fun villain with his menacing floating and his darkness obsession. Although I can't be the only one who misses when he was voiced by Billy Zane in the first game. The character just never really felt the same to me since, you know? Learning this fight felt like learning a whole new language. His attacks are very deliberate and easy to recognize, but have really weird timings or ways to avoid them. It felt almost like he was playing a puzzle game with you. It's also somewhat based around projectiles and needing to close distance with him as well, which is kind of unique, because there are countless bosses in the series whose only goal, it seems, is to get right up in your face and do melee combos. Ansem, on the other hand, kind of forces you to break a lot of that muscle memory in a sense, because he needs you to get close to him to do damage. It's you that needs to get closer to attack, not him. Can I give him points for having probably the scariest looking desperation attack as well? The entire field becomes a dark void, he showers you with these inky pellets from massive orbs that move so quickly that it's like they have a mind of their own. Seriously, one of their reaction times for not getting hit by them is so strict that I actually developed this strategy where I abuse a leaf bracer iframes to get through it. Like, that's just wild, man. And then he takes you even deeper and starts throwing these explosive black orbs at you, which is a throwback to his Dream Drop distance fight of all things. I did not expect that boss to be referenced. It's kind of cool seeing him fight without his cum guardian for once too. He doesn't have it anymore for story reasons, so it's pretty cool how they were able to still give him a full moveset that still feels entirely him. It's such a wonderfully put together battle that's both difficult, very in character for him, and a ton of fun to learn. Really the only throwback they were missing here is that giant penis ship from the first game. Number 7, Data Larxene. I've always had very mixed feelings on Larxene's boss fights. Her Chain of Memories fight is frankly one of the most frustrating fights in the entire game, though being a pain in the ass is very in character for her, so I don't really hate it as much as I probably should. Her RE Chain of Memories fight feels like an RE Chain of Memories fight. So many bosses in that game just blend into me, to be honest. And then her 2 fight is just weird. Like, it just always felt a little off to me. Anytime I would battle her in that game, I would either get completely bodied, or I'd feel like I just cheesed her in some kind of way. Seriously, it feels almost as if Reflectica spam is the intended way to beat her. It's so weird. I never understood how you're really supposed to do that fight. So with all that in mind, I didn't know what to expect for this boss, but I ended up liking it a lot more than I thought I would. Her attacks are just fun to learn. I really can't put it any more simply than that. The ground shockwave, the jumping attack, the zipping attacks, the interesting way she combines all of these moves later in the fight as well. This fight has a really satisfying ebb and flow to it. You're constantly finding yourself weaving in and out of attacking her and dodging her. Set attacks just feel intuitive, and it's pretty easy to tell what can and can't be blocked. It's an extremely fast-paced fight on both ends as well. So fast effect that it legitimately reminds me a lot of Lion Sora to a certain extent, a gameplay style I seem to love way more than the average person for some reason. Like, honestly, I would love to see Lion Sora return, because gameplay in that world is just really fun to me. My only real criticism with this fight is that I think her desperation attack is a little BS. I never felt like I learned this one. At least you can't cheese it anymore like you can in 2, but I just felt like there was a little too much going on during it. It does look impressive, though, like, looking up videos of people actually finding their way through it. Like, seriously, magic clone attacks are really underrated. One day I would love to go back to this fight and, like, fully learn it. But, God, it's so hard to believe that there's finally a fight against Larxene that is something I love to do. Great job, 3 devs. This one's pretty amazing. Number 6, Data Xion.
Suck my ass, Xion's a person. Fuck you. Fuck you!
Xion is a character I've always wanted to see them experiment more in terms of her battle prowess. In 3 of 8 Days, she fights pretty interchangeably from Roxas, and at the end of 3, it seems as if she has this ability to copy the powers of other organization members. Given her struggles of looking for identity in others, I thought that was a really cool gimmick that actually was kind of in character for her, and they could probably play a lot more of this too. Like, heck, maybe this is how we could get some iconic attacks from ex-organization members to return, you know? Like, she would just do those sorts of attacks. Like, they would just be absorbed into her normal moveset. It kind of seemed like there was a lot of design space potential there. Her actual data battle, though, didn't really go in that direction. Instead, she kind of reverts back to just having more or less the moveset Roxas had, but, way faster this time. And while that may not have been the direction I would have liked them to go with this character, I ended up really liking this fight regardless. Xion is fast. That's the name of the game with this fight. She has fast projectiles, fast melee combos, she can close distance with you very quickly. That might make you think her fight plays a little similarly to Larxene and that you need to play fast as well, but I actually felt that taking it slow and steady was a much better strategy here. Because once you actually sit back and start watching how her attacks work, they're a lot easier to learn, and become a lot more fun to try and pick out in her insane moveset. Some strategies I picked up on include trying to stay as far away from her as possible during her more tame default attacks, since having a lot of distance between you and her gives you more time to react to blocking these lasers, as well as when she tries to zip right up to you. Every third time she throws her Keyblade, you have an opportunity to use a risk dodge. And ironically, staying closer to her during her desperation attacks makes them easier to deal with. Kinda funny how that works out. I kinda don't like how she can stun you, though. Like, seriously, just kill me at that point, because of how fast she is, you're not regaining balance before she hits you again. And one huge missed opportunity I can't help but feel they skipped out on here. I really wish this armor appeared at some point during the fight. Xion was actually the final boss of Days, and she gets this really creepy armor that looks a bit like some corrupted nobody version of Sora. It's a weird design I always kinda liked. And I think that would have been a really cool throwback to reference in this fight. I mean, come on, some of her attacks give her armor, so why not give her that outfit during them? I don't know, I still love this fight though at the end of the day. Mechanically, it's just a lot of fun. And now that hopefully Xion is actually remembered by people in this universe now, hopefully they'll finally give her, like, more interesting stuff to do in this series. Number 5, Data Vanitas.
Yeetus Vanitas!
Vanitas has always been one of my favorite bosses in this series because every time you fought him in Birth by Sleep, his fights tended to not really feel like traditional bosses, if that makes sense. It felt almost like you were fighting another player with his own set of unique powers and abilities. His attacks feel realistically like something you yourself could do. He's got his own dodge maneuver and melee combo. He's even susceptible to status ailments, which is rare for a boss in this series. And over the course of the story, you see him become more powerful over time as well. It all makes this recurring boss feel somewhat like a rival character, the likes of which we haven't seen since, like, Riku from the very first game, I guess? Though I think it's done even better here. It's really unique. Like, I really like this character. He doesn't feel like that anymore, though. What they ended up doing for this fight is taking a ton of his attacks you know and love from him and making them more dangerous, faster, and flashy on a whole new level. The Dark Faraga, the super volcano-looking thing, the teleporting dive, the White Crescent arc things, his Keyblade surfing. They're all here, just with way tighter timing needed to actually avoid them all this time. Heck, a few of these attacks even have all new mix-ups to them, which definitely makes for a battle that feels familiar, yet fresh at the same time, which frankly is kind of exactly what I wanted from this fight in the first place. The hardest part of this fight by far is his desperation attack. I think it's one of the hardest ones to live through in the entire area, honestly. It's just really fast and requires some insane reaction time that I frankly never felt like I fully learned to do reliably. You won't see this in the footage I uploaded, but during a lot of failed attempts at this battle, I actually found myself pause buffering this to make reacting to his attacks easier. Eventually, though, I just took the lazy man's approach and just abused Ariel's iframes to get through it. Hey, it's a legitimate strategy, alright? They give you this summon for a reason. It's really fun to figure out openings on him, too. Kind of like with a few battles so far, his attacks can be countered more often than you'd think, although the window to do so is way harder than it would be if you were to just block it then move on to his next move. It makes for a really dynamic fight, where in real time you have to make risky decisions. Is he close enough to be countered? Am I safe to counter here? He has so many attacks, you'll never get a chance to take all those opportunities, which makes it much more satisfying when you're able to. It felt like a fight I was always learning new strategies with each failed attempt as a result. Vanitas is great, and I'm super glad this boss did him justice. Number 4, Yozora.
I'm Sora.
Yozora!
You know, I remember back when Base KH3 launched, I was under the impression that this character was meant to be no more than a joke, poking fun at how samey Nomura's character design can be sometimes. No. Oh my god, no. Apparently they have way bigger plans for him, and even plans to make him like a major character moving forward. Also, I think at this point I should mention that I haven't played Melody of Memories yet, the most recent Kingdom Hearts game as of the time I'm making this video. So if there are any huge revelations of him there, I haven't experienced them yet. I don't know, man, I'll get to it eventually, but I'm in no rush since after Ice Cream Beat Infinity Fun, the phrase Kingdom Hearts rhythm game just puts a bad taste in my mouth, you know? But back on topic, after completing all 13 data battles, you get some plot, and then you find yourself fighting this in-universe video game character who just kills Sora, like he outright kills him, before muttering the very first lines from the very first game. Nomura, what are you planning? But after a few more failed attempts of freaking out, you start to get into that zen phase of actually learning how this boss works, and it's an experience unlike anything else in this series. The biggest hurdle to learning this fight is that, just straight up, he doesn't fight like a Kingdom Hearts character. His abilities, his moveset, his animation style, the timings on his attacks, it makes him feel almost like something out of a much faster-paced action RPG, like Devil May Cry or something. It's a surreal feeling, and I can't help but feel that this was all intentional, given that he's technically not supposed to be a character from this universe at all. In fact, this apparently isn't even his true form, whatever that's supposed to mean. God, what a mysterious character. What I heard about this fight was true. He truly is the hardest boss in Kingdom Hearts history. Yet, at the same time, he's very fun to learn. What makes him so difficult, at least to me, is that on top of just a lot of his moves not feeling very Kingdom Hearts-esque, he also has this thing going on where, while a lot of his attacks are easy to pick out from one another, you need some inhumane reaction time to block them all. And as for countering them, well, countering his attacks are typically not that much harder than just living through them, for whatever that counts for, but the specific tricks you need to use to counter them are very unconventional in a way that'll make them unforgettable once you learn them. We're talking stuff like standing close to him when he does these 3 slashes before disappearing, so you can hit him the frame he reappears, dodge rolling backwards when he summons this hologram sword so it hits you from the front instead of the back, using Thundaga to break him out of this pyramid attack. It's all weird stuff, you know? And don't even get me started on his desperation attack, because he has one of those too, you know, as if this boss wasn't challenging enough already. I tried a lot of strategies and tricks I found online to this guy, but eventually what ultimately worked for me was sort of a strategy I came up with on my own. And that's another thing I like about this fight. It feels like there's more than one way to, like, do him well, you know? The strategy I came up with was to essentially bum rush him with everything I have. I maxed out my attack with every boost I could possibly put on myself, even stuff like that risky armor that raises attack instead of defense. Every opportunity I had to deal damage to him, I went for it, even if it would put me in immediate danger. And this ended up working so well that during my winning run, he didn't even get to his final phase, which is almost identical to his first phase, but you can't block most of his attacks at that point. Like, seriously, I killed him during his desperation attack, during a phase where I didn't even know he could be damaged at all. I don't think that was necessarily intended of me, but it felt so satisfying to pull it off. God, this fight is so cool. Overall, this fight was a blast to learn, and I am nothing but excited to learn more about Yozora in future games. After the bombshell that was this entire last section of the game, I frankly have no idea what to expect moving forward, but I am totally here for it. Number 3, Data Saïx. Speaking of back on my bullshit, I'm gonna draw a Kingdom Hearts character. One who's angry all the goddamn time. It's Saïx? I tried to draw Saïx. It's quite complex. It pulls you into the center. As does Saïx. Okay, so remember at the start of this video when I said that my personal opinions on these characters will probably influence how I rank them? Well, this one is probably the biggest offender to that, because the impression I tended to get from this fight whenever I looked it up online is that people found this one to be a bit of the pain in the ass. But I don't know, man, I just really like it. But Jesus Christ, this was one of the hardest ones in this entire area. I will sentiment that at the very least. I really like Saïx. He's always been one of my favorite Kingdom Hearts characters even. I love his design, his bosses are typically very fun to me. I think he's really badass. His moon gimmick is pretty cool. He was my quote-unquote main in 358 days for what that means. And to top it all off, he commands my favorite enemy in the entire series, the Berserker. Those of you who saw my last Kingdom Hearts video might remember I dedicated a whole section of those things. Like, they're really cool, and I just love them a lot. Now, for his fight in this game, I think the hardest part about wrapping your head around this fight is that his Berserker bar doesn't work exactly like you would expect it to. You might assume it works like it did in 2, where he has a normal phase and then an invincible Anger Berserker phase. He's never invincible, though, in this fight, and he's kind of angry all the time now. Instead, what this bar does is it tells you what attacks are available to him at any given time. It starts midway full, and from here he can do some basic throwing and combo attacks. The biggest thing you'll have to worry about here are these rare mix-ups where he, like, stops for a second before charging at you. As time passes or he takes damage, the bar fills up, and when it becomes all the way full, he goes berserk. And this is when, despite having a few openings, it might be better to just play more defensively at this point. The Berserker bar will then rapidly begin to deplete, and when it's empty all the way, he just stands defensively in one place, and this is the safest time to attack him. From there, the bar starts to fill up again, and once it hits yellow, the fight more or less resets. It's a lot to keep track of, but ironically I kind of like it. It gives this fight this real feeling of progression and flow once you have a better handle on how to deal with attacks in certain phases. His full bar Berserker Assault is basically a desperation attack in and of itself, which kind of lends to this feeling of always having to play at your best. Like, it's simply exhilarating, like the ultimate test of your reflexes. It's a type of fight I feel only a character like Saïx could pull off. There's some amazing fan service in this fight too. So many of his attacks come straight from his battle in 2, just way more dangerous. And he even has this one move, which is the move you used on him during the original fight against him. That kind of blew me away when I first saw it. I also can't help but feel like this character is a little validated by this fight, if that makes sense. Hear me out. While I love his boss in 2, there are frankly way too many ways to cheese that fight, and it kind of makes him a bit of a joke, especially when you watch like speedrunners do this fight. And in 3, his battle is a 3-on-1, and you have the angriest Roxas of all time by your side, and he just stands no chance whatsoever. And as a result, It just makes me so happy to finally see him get this super hard boss that takes no bullshit whatsoever. No duck flare spam, no Peter Pan revenge value cheese, no angsty blonde hair kids to do half the fight for you. It's just you and him, one-on-one. It's among the hardest fights in the entire series, and god damn it feels appropriate. God, there's even cool stuff like, say, how you can use a blizzard to artificially force his berserker meter to lower. Like, there's just so much I love about this boss. Saïx truly deserved and was long overdue for a fight like this, and I absolutely love it. Number 2, Data Marluxia.
Xemnas, can I get some ice cream? Only a spoonful, Marluxia.
Kind of like with Larxene, I've always had very mixed feelings on this character's bosses as well. In Chain of Memories, I really love the first form, but his second form is, frankly, the most boring final boss in the entire series. In RE Chain of Memories, his fight feels like an RE Chain of Memories fight once again. Although, to his credit, his second and especially his third form are a bit more interesting. And then his 2 fight just kind of annoys me. It's by far my least favorite Data battle in that game. Although, unlike with why I disliked Larxene's fight in that game, it's not so much a feeling that he doesn't have a clear gimmick, but more that I just think there are too many gimmicks to this fight at once that don't really work well together. For example, his Doom counter. This is a clever idea for a fight, basing a lost state on taking hits as opposed to taking damage. But let's be real here. Unless you're doing a level 1 run, since the number of hits you're allowed is tied to your level, have you ever died to this mechanic? I know I never have, and it just kind of makes this whole counter gimmick underdeveloped to a point at which it's barely something you have to consider in the fight at all. Compare this to something like, say, Luxord's time bars, which, well, yeah, you can still die normally from losing health in that fight. The gimmick feels a lot more integral to the battle itself. It affects both players, it's tied to more mechanics in the fight than just taking damage. Paying close attention to what affects it actively teaches you how to do this fight well. Meanwhile, Marluxia's gimmick essentially amounts to just don't take damage, which is kind of a game plan you're trying to follow anyway. And then aside from that, I frankly found most of his attacks to be just outright annoying. Like, the thing where he just sticks above you, I never really liked it. It honestly just freaks me out when he does that. The weird black holes I feel like can one-shot you sometimes, which, again, like, how does that benefit the Doom counter gimmick? So yeah, not really a character I feel has had the greatest bosses, to be frank. In this game, though, well, he's number 2, so, yeah, this fight is basically everything I've always wanted out of a fight with Marluxia, even going as far as to outright fix a lot of the problems I had with 2 versions of his battle. Like, for example, the Doom counter. He still does this move, but it's a countdown instead of a counter, which I wholeheartedly prefer this change. Not only does it work better with the fight by tying it to a desperation attack instead of a constant annoying threat, but it's also closer to how Doom typically works in Final Fantasy in the first place. It's a countdown in that series as well. I love how a lot of his attacks also let you use magic in clever ways. I almost always go for magic builds whenever I play these games, and one criticism that's always kind of given me with this series as a result is that once you get this late into most of the games, magic is just kind of objectively bad compared to your normal melee combo. But that changes a bit here, as both fire gets utility, allowing you to instantly break his armor, and to a lesser extent Thundaga, which makes it easy to take care of these pedal turrets. The openings to hit him are peculiar. They're a little hard to figure out, and just when you think you've fully figured out this fight, it feels like you always discover just a little bit more nuance to it. One of my favorite parts of this fight is when he first puts that Doom counter on you and transforms the stage into this black swamp, which, well, I can't say I ever really associated Marluxia with evil swamps, but it just feels fitting for some reason. Oh, and he also has less armor when he's attacking during these sections, which kind of encourages you to practice counter-attacking against him. And then... God, that skull always gives me goosebumps every time. You know what my favorite thing about this fight is, though? In a weird way, I feel like it kind of gave me a new appreciation for this character, which is something kind of unique to him. Because prior to this, I always thought Marluxia was a little meh. The game he was introduced in was never my favorite, and he had, like, one good fight there. And then in 2, I outright disliked his boss. And that's kind of the most we ever saw from him for over a decade. When I saw he was returning in 3, my immediate impression was, oh, cool, that guy. And that was kind of it. But after this data fight, I gotta say, after the new powers they gave him and revisions on abilities that were kind of annoying beforehand, I feel like if he ever does return, I'm gonna be pretty excited to see what he's returning for. Fun fact, in the original draft of this video, Marluxia was actually number 1. But then while scrubbing through footage, I was reminded of one really, really big red flag I just kind of forgot about with this fight because I was lucky enough to live through it on my first try by copying a strategy I found online. He's one of those bosses who can abruptly stop the battle at 1 HP to do a prolonged super attack that he's mostly invincible for. I hate bosses that do this. From memory, only him and young Xehanort have finales that work in this way, and I frankly hated when he did it as well. But other than that though, this is straight up one of my new favorite Kingdom Hearts bosses. There is one I liked a little bit more though, and that is number 1, Data Xemnas. So, we can all agree that Kingdom Hearts 2 has one of the best final bosses in the entire series, right? It's climactic, it's got a lot of build-up, it's difficult, there's some fun gimmicks to it. When I first played 2 as a kid, Xemnas really knew how to make a good first impression through his moveset, and frankly, ever since, he's always been my favorite main villain in the series, more than Xehanort, more than Marluxia, more than Ansem, more than young Xehanort. I also really liked his battle in Dream Drop Distance, a boss that people seem to never really talk about for some reason. I mean, I know I love Dream Drop Distance way more than the average Kingdom Hearts fan, but there's gotta be normal people out there who love this fight too, right? I love his writing, too. His personality is such a weird combination between, like, graceful and creepy, and it makes her a truly unforgettable bad guy. Oh, and don't get me started on those weird hand beam sword things he uses, too. It's always been a really iconic weapon to me, because, like, seriously, what even are they? It's such a unique ability. So then you take all that background and put it all together, and you have one of the most memorable, challenging, mechanically dense, and outright fun fights in this entire series. And, you know, how much I like Xemnas might be playing a factor here too, to be fair, but I don't care. I love this battle so much. He uses those Twilight Thorn things to teleport you around like he did in his original fight, because, you know, you can't reversal them in this game because reaction commands aren't a thing anymore. And it makes for such a terrifying first impression to this boss, because in a way, he has way more control over the flow of battle than you do. But don't let that freak you out. These teleporting thorns don't actually damage you unless they slam you into these light walls, so just air dash away from them if you can, and then simply accept where they're going to take you. Pay more attention to where Xemnas is instead of where you are. His attacks are tricky to pick out at a glance, but they all give more than enough time to react if you know what you're doing. And oddly, don't use ultimate form. God, I haven't even talked about Keyblades in this video yet, but when I see most people do with these battles online, they are usually using Oathkeeper and Oblivion. However, I tended to opt for Ultima Weapon just because I prefer the raw power, and Classic Tone for its MP haste, as well as whatever third Keyblade I felt would work best for any given fight, which for this one was Nano Gear, and I'll explain why in a little bit. The reason why I would never use Ultima Weapon's form change for this fight is because, simply put, he kept falling out of its combo. Like, one of the attacks sends the opponent downwards, and given how high Xemnas forces you to teleport sometimes, it can make it impossible to finish a combo on him. I had a similar problem with Yozora, like one of his attacks does a similar thing. Instead, I would use the Boom Hammer, the form change of the Classic Tone. It's essentially a giant squeaky mallet that's strong, though typically not recommended for this area due to how slow it is. But wouldn't you know it, it has an attack in the middle of its combo which slams you down to the ground, along with your target. Wow, that is not a type of utility I ever expected to see from this weapon, and that's really cool to me. But then you get to my favorite part of the fight. Remember that laser dome he did in 2? He did this during the final boss, and it's an incredibly iconic moment in the series for me, albeit it was a glorified cutscene. In 3, though, you have to manually live through it. This was the ultimate test of reflexes to me. He attacks incredibly quickly, combined with the laser dome firing everything it has at you. And then later in the move, he throws these shots that can't be blocked at all, and you have to dodge roll them instead. And all while he's teleporting you around, it's without a doubt one of the most stressful things I've ever had to deal with in the series, and I wouldn't have it any other way. It feels so in character for him, and it's an incredible climax to the entire fight. There's apparently a few interesting ways to live through this final barrage of lasers. Apparently the run speeds of a couple certain form changes can straight up outrun them. During a ton of failed attempts, I actually used Simba, of all things, to tank through them in a similar way. God, you can tell how much polish was put into these fights by how many unique ways there are to deal with these crazy attacks. The last cool singled out thing I'd like to mention about this boss is that I found an interesting use for the nano gear. I typically don't like this Keyblade, but it makes you immune to the stun status ailment. And this is the only fight in the game that forces you into that ailment, even if you do like a flawless run of it. Because even if you complete the laser dome attack without taking damage, you'll be stunned as you exit it, but not when you have nano gear equipped. This fight rules. They took a boss here that I already knew and loved and managed to recreate in a way that feels familiar, yet 100% original. It's an emotional roller coaster from beginning to end, bolstered even more by the music, which, well... This boss music is the best rendition of Xemnas' theme, I'm just gonna say it. And yeah, those are my personal rankings. From favorite to least favorite, we have Xemnas, Marluxia, Saïx, Yozora, Vanitas, Xion, Larxene, Ansem, Master Xehanort, Luxord, Young Xehanort, Terra-Xehanort, Xigbar, and Dark Riku. Now, this is of course my opinion, and heck, I'm pretty self-aware that I tend to have really unpopular opinions when it comes to this series sometimes. Like, for example, Dream Drop Distance is my second favorite game in the series. You know that mobile game? I believe there are only 2 good things that have ever come out of it. Cheerinthy and this stupid Bambi hat, which I like so much that it's an emote on my Discord server. I think you should play 2 before Chain of Memories, and you should avoid the remake of Chain of Memories at all costs because it is the worst game in the series. I don't think you need to play these games in order to enjoy the series. You can probably just hop in just about anywhere and pick up the pieces as you go along. I mean, playing them in order certainly helps, but like, if Kingdom Hearts 3 just looks really intriguing to you, go for it. If Birth by Sleep's command deck and melding mechanic looks like a ton of fun, try it out. If you just happen to find Recode at like a flea market or something, and it just looks interesting and you've never tried this series before, make that your first game. Why the heck not? My first game was 2, for crying out loud, and it turns out to be one of my favorite series of all time. Because, you know, the plot of the overarching thing is so notoriously hard to follow anyway, that you really don't have much to lose unless you just happen to pick one of the very few objectively bad games in the series. But yeah, feel free to leave your thoughts below. Which of these were some of your favorites? Which ones did I like that you hated, and vice versa? All opinions are valid here. And as per usual, thank you so much for watching, and thanks to my Patreon supporters as well, Great Wolf, Horror Gemstone, and Gallo. Feel free to share this video and subscribe if you found it fun. It always helps the channel out, and I will see you folks later. Thanks for watching.